For today's episode, I want to talk to you guys a little bit about something that I've seen in our clients who are successful and our clients who aren't. And I really want to tell you a little bit of a story of my life. And the title of this episode is going to be From Roadkill to an Eight-Figure Business, because that's kind of what this story arc is. And I'm going to spend more time talking about the roadkill than I am the eight-figure business, because while that's awesome, and it's not something, we talk about, like Jay and I don't have a podcast or a YouTube channel that focuses on how to, build a business empire. I talk about those things in the show, but I haven't really, talked a lot about the financial success and all those things, because to me, that's the byproduct. And I really just want to tell you, this story. So when I was around 22 years old, I was completely lost. Like I had no real direction. I had no real big picture. I had just quit my first full real job, because I couldn't see any light. Like I just quit. I remember like in the span of 6 months, I had maybe 2 days where I wasn't working 22 hours a day. And that wasn't that's not an overstatement. I'll have to tell you guys one of these days, what that job actually looked like. But I remember I had 2 days over a 6 month span where I didn't work 22-hour days. I had off for some weird reason. And I remember spending those full days in bed, basically just so depressed I couldn't get out of bed. But I got to the point where I had to quit. There was just no light at the end of the tunnel. But when I quit, I had no major job or career prospects. I was 22, I had a bachelor's degree. This was 2000, end of 2009, beginning of 2010. So this was when the economy was just an absolute disaster and they weren't hiring anybody. So I felt like a massive failure. I still remember right before I quit, I called my mom. I was in the car. I had just left the hospital from where I was working. I was running from hospital to hospital. And I just pulled over in a neighborhood and I called my mom and I just broke down crying. And I was just completely devastated with my life, as a whole. And, at this point, I also felt like I had a lot of unfulfilled potential. And, I'd left my academic career kind of from undergrad as a shell of what was possible, and I decided, after I quit my job and I really didn't know what I was doing in life and I had no job, no future, no idea what I was doing, I decided I'm just going to go into the comfort of academia because it's school. I'm going to go pursue a doctoral degree. Now, my undergrad was nothing remarkable. I had a couple years in undergrad that was really tough because I got sick, super sick, felt like maybe I almost died sick, and I had no real business applying to graduate programs. I had a few gaps in my transcripts just from being sick in undergrad, to apply to science programs. But I was pretty hell-bent on going back, and I was like, hey, I'm going to go get my master's and I'm going to go get my doctorate. Because if I can go from where I am now and I can get there, then maybe I'll have the confidence in life to go do something meaningful. So I made the decision to move back home. I applied for some undergraduate coursework to kind of clean up the holes in my transcripts. I got several part-time jobs. This is where I got my first kind of internship, and then got my CSCS and started training people at a gym and did my first kind of internship at Gonzaga with the basketball team, which was maybe the greatest break I've ever had in my life. They just took in a kid who had nothing going on. And I literally just started sweeping up the floor before practice. And this was in summer when they were doing off-season stuff. And so this was kind of I began the path to get my life, back together. So fast forward 18 months, I was accepted into a master's program by the skin of my teeth, and was studying under a professor, and I was studying biomechanics. I knew nobody there. I'd managed to scrape by, and I saved, living with my parents and personal training on the side. I'd saved about $2,000, and it was just enough for me to get first month's rent and kind of, my first semester of books. Now, I had no real background in biomechanics. Like they had an opening. I got in. I had no research experience. Didn't do any undergrad research. I'd never read an academic paper before, and I'd taken maybe 2 minutes of statistics. Like we had business math, business statistics in undergrad, but I took it in a summer course, and it was like 6 weeks, and my professor was like, just could have cared less. So I didn't really have a statistics course. So I was way out of my league. And kind of day one of classes of my master's program, I felt like someone who would never run before, and I was starting at the starting line of a 100-mile ultra run. Like I was so far behind everybody on day one. Like maybe I was the only person there who didn't know what like a method section in a paper was. Like I knew literally less than zero. But I felt like at that moment in my life, it was the greatest opportunity I had ever been given, and I was going all in. Like I just remember the feeling of like, this is my one shot. Now, looking back, it probably wasn't, but like I just remember this feeling of just complete desperation, like complete desperation. And so, I didn't, in that moment, I decided I didn't care what it took, what sacrifices I had to make. I was going to get through this master's program, and I was going to get into a doctoral program, and I was going to be the best student they had ever seen. So I'll skip a few details, and I'll kind of just start to get to the heart of the messages. I made the decision on day one of that program that I was going to spend this period of my life, this graduate school period of my life, prioritizing whatever I needed to succeed and achieve this goal. I knew that I needed to live alone, so I wouldn't be distracted by anybody or anything. So the first, I had a small problem. I was on an assistantship that paid me $1,000 a month from basically August until June, right? And so I accepted late, and so I was kind of the only single person, or I accepted late into the program, and so the only apartment that was a single person apartment available within cycling distance of the campus was $700 a month, and I made $1,000 a month. So that means like I had $300 to live on. So there's some details in here I'll skip, but like I knew that I had to do it. So I signed the lease, and I realized I was going to have to live on around $10 a day for the next several years. So this literally meant that in the winter I turned off the heat, or I turned it down to like 48 degrees so the pipes wouldn't freeze. And I lived in an apartment with 50-degree temperatures for months at a time. I would often shower at the gym, and when it got really cold in the winter, I would sleep in my office at night because the heat there was free. Most months I couldn't afford to put gas in my car, so I would cycle to campus at like 4 a.m. every morning, and I would cycle home at night. When it would snow more than 12 inches, I would borrow snowshoes from our rec center for the weekend so I could walk back into the lab for data collection. And I remember, at one point it got so icy I couldn't ride my bike in, so I'd walk to campus every day. And I remember one Christmas, I asked my grandma for frozen meat and canned beans for Christmas. And I literally like cried when I got a month worth of frozen roast from my grandma for Christmas. Like she bought me a whole bunch. I brought it to my freezer and I put it in there. And that was like the greatest gift maybe that I've ever received. And I remember was it the first or second? Must have been the second fall semester. I got there in the fall, and I lived in it was basically a farm town, right? Moscow, Idaho. The farmers would sell their excess squash at like 29 cents a pound. And I realized squash doesn't go bad. Like it has a long shelf life. So I saved up and I bought 100 pounds of squash. So for $30, I had 100 pounds of food that was like non-perishable. And I could like roast the squash, and it would give me like 6 or 7 meals at that time in my life. And so I actually ate so much squash that my skin turned orange. Like I remember coming home, I came home for Thanksgiving, and I came home a day early because like for some reason we didn't have any participants in the lab or whatever. And I remember shadowing my dad in the OR just for a day because I was home and I didn't have anything to do, and I really just didn't want to keep reading my textbooks. So I remember going to the OR, and if you've ever been under lights in the OR, they're like super white fluorescent. And I remember the nurse is like, "What's wrong with your son? Why is he so orange?" And so like my skin was so orange. I also remember like at this point in my life, every Friday, because I would get paid every other Friday. I got like $500 every 2 weeks. And I remember on Fridays, the Safeway would have the leftover pre-cooked deli chickens. And so every Friday, before I would, at a certain point, I would have to drive up to Spokane to go into the lab. But when I was staying on campus, I would go to Safeway, I would buy a deli chicken. And that deli chicken would give me like 8 meals, right? You have the 2 thighs, the 2 breasts, the 2 legs, and then you could like scrape off all the other meat like that just was in between. It would basically give me like 6 to 8 meals. And I remember, grabbing the deli chicken, putting it in the grocery bag and putting it on my handlebars of my bike and riding my bike home. And the deli chicken ripped through the grocery bag on my way home, and it rolled down the street in the middle of the street. I was driving across a crosswalk, and I was driving this way, and there was a hill like kind of perpendicular to it, and it fell, and it just rolled down the hill. And I just remember thinking, like, I gotta go pick that chicken up. Like, I can't afford to waste $4.99. So I get off my bike, and I walk down the hill, and I grab this chicken, and I take it home, and I wash it off, and I break it up, and I eat it for the week. And I remember during that week, like, I'd find bits of rocks in the chicken when I ate it. I remember cutting open toothpaste tubes. I remember watering down shampoo. I started a podcast. I don't know if it's still up. It probably isn't. It was called Evolutionary Health. My friend Mike and I, who I met down in Idaho, we recorded it. It actually got some good traction. I think we had several thousand views a week on it. But the reason I started it was so I could get sponsorships and get discounts. And eventually, there was a company at the time, I think they were called Whole Food Source. I think that was the company. It was John Wellborn. He was CrossFit football. I remember I reached out to them and said, "Hey, like, here's my podcast. I'm looking for ads and sponsors. I'm a young college student. If you guys are interested." And I remember they're like, "Hey, if you just plug us at the opening of your show, we'll send you some samples." And I remember, if I ever see these people in person, I am going to give them the biggest hug I've ever given anybody. They sent me 2 boxes of samples. I mean, and it was probably 4 months worth of protein powder and maybe 6 weeks worth of beef jerky and like a whole bunch of trail mix. And that like saved me. I remember eating their beef jerky for like a whole week for meals because I was completely out of money. I worked odd jobs so I could hire a doctoral student. This is where I started nutrition coaching because I needed to make extra money. So I was doing online nutrition coaching. I think I picked up like 7 to 10 clients because I needed to hire a doctoral student in the computational neuroscience program because I needed them to teach me coding and differential equations for one of the projects I was working on. I remember I went home for my birthday one weekend because I lived like 2 hours away from my parents' house, and it was Super Bowl Sunday. It was my birthday, and everybody was down there watching TV, and I was sitting upstairs in the like dining room where it was quiet, and I was preparing for my like prelims. And I remember people coming in there and being like, "It's the Super Bowl. It's Sunday. It's your birthday. Why are you working?" And I was like I had to. Like I was locked in, and I had made a decision in my life about what mattered to me at the time. And I focused all of my energy on that, and I set my environment to be completely focused on that. It didn't matter what the circumstances were. I just was all in on getting things done. And so how did that story end up? I'm not sure, to be honest. I'm still working on it. But, I ended up finishing my master's degree in 10 months. It was a 3-year master's program, and I managed to get it done in 10 months. I'd finished my doctoral program in a little over 2 years. I think it was like 25 months to the date from like start to end. And like I got through it. I crushed it. I graduated with perfect marks. I don't ever tell people this, but like both my master's and my doctorate ended up with a 4.0. And I grew up and I built myself into the person that I wanted to become during that phase of my life. Now, I'm still super flawed with a lot of work to do ahead of me, but who I am as a person is far better than who I was before. Now, was that the healthiest approach? Probably not. Actually, absolutely not. Like if you look back, that's not a healthy way to live and not a healthy way to pursue your goals. And is this the approach that everybody needs to take? Probably not. Actually, definitely not. And so when I think about it, it taught me incredible lessons, and it gave me a mindset and a work ethic that I wouldn't trade for anything. And it gave me this thought process and this kind of mindset of no matter what happens, I know that if I ever want to go somewhere and get something done, I have the ability to get there. I don't ever want to go through it again, but I know like there's a certain power in knowing that if you want something, you have the ability to go do what needs to get done to get there. But what's really interesting is when I look back, those are actually some of my fondest memories. Like sleeping on the couch in my office, like having 100 pounds of squash in my apartment, those are some of the best memories I have because I think of who I was and who I was becoming, not knowing it at the time and just going through the day to day. And the thing is, like, I don't regret any of it. I wouldn't go back and do any of it differently. It made me me, and I'm proud of that. And what I just want to kind of tie this to is I see a lot of people, a lot of our clients, like going through a journey very similar to this. Now, obviously, it's not like this. Everybody's is different, but like I see a lot of people accomplishing these really crazy things, changing their life, and just watching who they become in this journey is pretty remarkable. And the biggest thing, kind of take home that I want to give people is I hope that during your journey and at the end of your journey, you get to stop and look back and say, look at the lessons that I taught myself. Look at the mindset and the work ethic I gave myself. Look at where I went. Look at who I became, and I'm super proud of that. And so I think, those are the things that really define our journey in our life. And just embrace all of those things because one day you'll get to where you want to be and you'll look back and you'll go, that was awesome. So that's it. I'm Dr. Brad. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I will see you guys later.